In this video, we're going to talk about absolute value inequalities like this one. So in this case, let's look at this first one. We have the negative absolute value of x plus 4 is less than 3. So we can go ahead and solve that by subtracting 4 from both sides at first. And that cancels out, and now I have the negative absolute value of x is less than negative 1. The last step is to divide both sides by negative 1. So one of the rules about when you divide or multiply negative numbers on an inequality, you have to switch the signs. So I'm going to divide negative 1 here and negative 1 here to make it so that it's absolute value of positive x. Now, since I divided both sides by a negative number, I have to switch the inequality sign. So now I have the absolute value of x is greater than positive 1. So in order to graph this, I'm asked to graph this. I'm going to draw a number line. It doesn't have to be perfect. And if the absolute value is greater than 1, what that's going to look like, I've got a 0 in the middle, I've got a positive 1 here, and I've got a negative 1 here. So the absolute value is greater than 1, so I'm going to draw an open circle around 1 and then draw an arrow pointing to the right. That means that all of the numbers that are bigger than 1, not including 1, are included in the solutions. But since it's absolute value, I'm also going to circle negative 1 and have an arrow over here pointing to the left. Because if you think about it, over here I've got stuff like negative 2, and if I take the absolute value of negative 2, it's positive 2, so it's still greater than 1. So whenever you have absolute value and it's greater than, you're going to have the arrows pointing outwards. Let's do another example real quick. So here I've got the absolute value of x plus 3 is less than or equal to 7. So I'm going to just go ahead and subtract 3 from both sides. And I have the absolute value of x is less than or equal to 4. Now in this case, I don't have to divide or do anything with a negative number, so I do not have to switch the signs. But now it's less than 4, so I'm going to go ahead and draw my number line. I'm going to do 4, I'm going to do a 0 in the middle, and then I'm going to do a negative 4 over here. And pretty much always going to be like this when you do absolute value inequalities. So less than or equal to 4, that tells me I need to draw a dot around 4, and I also need to shade it in because the less than or equal to is including. And then I'm also going to shade in the negative 4, and this time I'm going to actually shade in between these two, because all of the solutions in between these two, if you think about it, any of these numbers, if you take the absolute value, is going to be less than 4 or equal to 4. So for example, if you have a negative 2 here and you take the absolute value of a negative 2, the absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2, and 2 is less than or equal to 4, so it satisfies this inequality.